Dear students, today we will be discussing on the concept of federalism through the lenses of the Constitution of India. Dear students, when we talk about the concept of any certain topic, we need to see it through the parameters of three important things. That is, how, what and why do we need to understand this concept? How do we need to perceive this concept? Why do we need to read certain things about this concept in order to bring it into the application stage of the case? So, here in this lecture we will understand the concept of federalism as a whole and how does the Indian Constitution has adopted this concept for the nation. Through these parameters which we have discussed, that is why, how and what. So, when we start with understanding the concept, we need to know the epistemology of that particular term which we are reading about. Then we need to understand the meaning of it and certainly the origin of that particular word. So, when we read about epistemology, here are the Latin word fidus comes into existence. Fidus means alliance, treaty or agreement, which gives rise to the word federation, which makes the terms states, union of state, province, etc. And with the amalgamation of these two words, that is the fidus and federation, we get into the concept, the origin of the concept of federalism arises, wherein there is alliance between two or more states, wherein we will be understanding that there is a need of level of government in order to form the governance of that particular state, and hence federalism is that forming or defining of the levels of the government in which the particular state will be functioning. So, let us move to the meaning, defined meaning of the term federalism. Federalism is a system of government in which powers have been divided between the center and its constituent parts such as states or provinces. It is an institutional mechanism to accommodate two sets of polities, one at the center or the national level and second at the regional or provincial level. So, in simple words, we can understand it that there has to be minimum two levels and it can lead to two or more levels of the separation of powers or the authorities in order to attract the concept of federalism. It is very simple. And when we read about the origin of this particular word, it started with the term league. League is certainly known as when you read about provinces or the alliance or treaty between two or more countries or states and they decide to be part of each other in order to upgrade their national economy. We termed it as league in the ancient centuries, and that got evolved and developed, and the concept of United States or Union of States came into existence, which is also known as Confederation of States. When Confederation of States came into existence, the major example of it which we can see is the United States of America, wherein majority of the states gotten together with the single motto of developing their national economy and became a federal state. So, here when we have understood what does this word mean, what is the meaning of the word and where did this word federalism come into existence, we need to understand how do we process this word federalism, how do we get into the basic concept of federalism. Now, the basic structure of federalism can be read in different aspects, starting with what is federalism and how different it is, what are the different sorts of federalism we need to understand and what sort of independence it holds in its existence. That is, forms or systems of government in which power and authority are divided into two levels, which is center or national, state and thirdly regional level. This is how the bifurcation is being done under federalism. Coming to the basic structure of federalism, there are two forms of government here, that is the federal and the unitary form of government, which makes it federal, wherein there has to be separation of powers, there has to be division of powers necessarily to attract the concept of federalism as we discussed in the meaning of it, whereas in unitary form of government there is single holding power. Federation of government is divided by the political system formed with agreement between various units, and necessarily the units have to be independent in nature, but will be depending on each other for certain powers and authorities for exchanging. Now, moving on to the concept of federation of government. When we talk about certain concept, it branches out certain subtopics to it, wherein the formation of federation comes into existence. When we talk about division of powers in the government, that is equals to the federalism, attracts two important aspects, that is integration and disintegration. Now, what do we understand by the term integration? Integration is equal to the coming together federation. There are two sorts of federations known as coming together of the federation and holding together of the federation. So, by the term coming together, it is very evident that when there are certain different states who willingly decide to come together and form an alliance, that is form a federalism, and holding together, which means that they necessarily did not earlier wanted to come together, but have been held by certain authority to bring them together and keep them holding on to it. So, these are two concepts. So, the coming together is equal to integration, which we must have read in the mathematics also, and when it comes to holding together federation, it is equals to the disintegration form of the federal government. So, here we will understand a little more about both these forms of government, that is coming together federation. The most important example for this is United States of America. Earlier, if you read the history of United States of America, number of provinces got together and made this particular union of states, and it got to be known as United States of America, and their sole purpose was to create a strong defense. The national security must be maintained if these provinces come together instead of being separately called as states. Thirdly, there will be a huge economic growth when these together form a federal state, and then the recognition in the world level will be greater. On the other hand, when it comes to holding together federation, the most important example, the most relevant example of it is our country, which is India, wherein we have so many states which the center is being holding on to. It has not given the choice of them to get disintegrated from the geographical demarcation which has been made by the country, that is India. So, when it comes to disintegration of the holding together federation, big union and vast geography is the most important aspect. As we know that India is a economically and geographically rich country. So, herein we had a number of provinces of individual stature earlier, and it was decided that all these individual provinces will be governed under one particular geographical demography. Hence, the division of power came into existence. We need to divide powers for such a big economy, such a big union, in order to avoid certain consequences. Hence, the separation of power was given in different levels, which is the center, state, and thirdly, the regional level, which came after the 73rd and the 74th amendment. So, when it comes to federalism as a concept, we discussed that there must be minimum 2 levels of government. So, here when we talk about India specifically, because we will be dealing it through the lenses of the Constitution of India, we need to understand how India can be termed as federal state. So, when it comes to federal state, minimum 2 level of government needs to be required. So, here when the province of various demarcations were brought together, were holded together, terming as holding together federalism, the concept of separation of power came into existence. The division of power came into existence, and 3 levels were divided, that is the center, state, and the regional level. Now, moving on to the next thing, which is that how will the powers flow once the federalism kicks in? Federalism has come into existence, we know that, by the division of powers and creation of 3 levels of government. Now, there will be 2 sorts of powers in which the authorities will be working, that is the flow of power will be discussed in two different variants, that is the vertical federalism and the horizontal federalism. Horizontal federalism means the organs of the government. When we talk about vertical and horizontal, we need to see it through the system which we have learned under the mathematics, that is the straight line formula. In vertical federalism, the powers is divided from top to bottom, wherein the highest power is the central government, then comes the state government, and then comes the regional or local government. When it comes to, on the other hand, the horizontal form of federalism, it divides the sleeping line, which is the legislature, the executive and the judiciary. Why do we consider it as horizontal federalism? Is because the powers are similar, the powers are equally distributed, but with the equal distribution of powers, there is the system of checks and balances also attached to it, so that there is nothing supremacy or nothing arbitrary in nature. In order to move out that arbitrariness from the governance, we have kept the concept of checks and balances attached to it. So, there are two types of flow of powers happening within the federation of government, within the levels of the government, that is the vertical and the horizontal federalism. For example, let us take an example of it. If there is an electricity outrage in my society, I will not go to the Prime Minister of the country. Instead of going to the Prime Minister of that country, I will be moving to the local government and the local help. So, this is how the flow of power and authority works, and this concept is known as the vertical federalism, wherein first I will be moving to the local government. If that gets resolved, the thing is being done. If that is not being done, the stages have to be increased accordingly. Then moving on to the horizontal federalism, when it works, the best example of it is that the legislature which makes the laws, it is known as the law making body. The legislature is making the laws, the judiciary is interpreting those laws, and the executive, for example, the law enforcement agencies known as the police in general words, looks after that these laws which have been prepared are being taken care of, are being applied in general sense, and is being working for the protection of the citizens of that particular nation. Now that we have understood these concepts of how does the basic structure of federalism as a concept work, we need to understand that why was there a need to bring such a concept? Why is there a need to bring the concept of federalism? What is the nature of it, what is the importance of federalism, and what are the merits and demerits of federalism. So, when we talk about nature of certain concept, we need to understand two things, that there is two different types of government, that is federal and the unitary, and we will be reading simultaneously how does the nature is being defined here. That is the distribution of power. When it comes to federal form of government, there has to be minimum 2 levels for the distribution of power, but when it comes to unitary government, there is one concentrated power. Then moving on to the next important feature which defines the nature of this particular concept is the constitution of that particular country. So, here when it comes to federal state, the constitution is rigid in its sense, whereas when it comes to unitary form, the constitution is not that rigid in nature, because here the only power which is rigid is the center, and that decides everything. And the most important feature which governs the nature of this particular concept is the amendments. How rigid is your amending power of the government? Federal form of government has rigid amendment powers, that anything and everything cannot be amended, but moderately can be amended. But when it comes to unitary form of government, again which gets into the hands of the center, which holds the most of the powers attached to it. And when it comes to judiciary, the another important feature defining the nature of this concept of both the governments, that is federal and unitary form of government. When it comes to judiciary, a judiciary must be independent in nature. For example, the horizontal flow of power which we have read earlier. Judiciary must be allowed to work independently, but with a hint of checks and balances. But when it comes to unitary form of government, that is not been allowed. Now, moving on to the need for federalism. Why did the need arise for this particular concept? Now, we understand that how unitary form of government works and how federal form of government work, it becomes easier for us to put India into bracket of federalism, because we have been reading about India since our elementary level, that how India works. India has a written constitution attached to it. India has central government, state government and regional government. That is, there is difference in the flow of powers and authorities, there is distribution of power happening. So, moderately now we can see that the country India is moving towards federal form of government. So, in order to attract the concept of federalism, the first thing which we discussed was that there must be a huge geography. So, there must be nexus between the national autonomy and national unity. There must be effective flow of power and authority, and it should be securing the interest of all living in a state. There must be cultural progress, there must be economic stability, there must be equal distribution of resources. Now, whatever the needs I have just mentioned to you people is that there must be effective flow of power and authority within the division of the government which we have created, for which the horizontal flow will be looking after the vertical flow of the government. That is, the central, state and the regional level will be dominated by, will be looked upon by the legislature, executive and the judiciary in various forms and various levels. Apart from that, the checks and balances concept will be included in it, so that none of the arbitrariness disrupts the peace and security of the country. And when we adopt federalism, it will be increasing the economic stability, as it is the holding together federation. There are a number of states which has been come together to become one particular country, one particular nation, one nation known as the Union of States. All right. So, when we have understood the need behind the implication, behind the application of this particular concept of federalism, we need to identify the importance of federalism in the formation of a particular state. That is, we have discussed it earlier also, there must be increase in flexibility, so that when there is distribution of power, it automatically inflicts the flexibility in it. There is less rigidity attached to it and it channels the growth. So, now moving on to the merits and the demerits of the federalism. The most important prospects which we can term as merits of this particular concept are that independent judiciary is a merit for the nation, as it helps for proper remedy and rights. The motto of unity in diversity, which we have always read in political science, has been very important to India for making it a federal government, and it helps to establish a country with mutual tolerance and existence. Whereas on the other hand, when it comes to demerits, see, when there are prospects attached to certain concept, the consequences are drawn towards it. We need to identify how to work on those consequences. So, first we will be discussing certain consequences, certain demerits of this particular concept of federalism which we follow as a country. There will be at certain level lack of consensus. For example, there are so many states here, but then every particular person will not agree to one concept. For example, the passing of bill regarding certain legislation, everybody will not be in favor of that bill. For example, triple talaq, for example, Sabrimala judgment, we can see that how we had certain ratio attached to it. So, this is one of the demerits which the concept of federalism brings it together with. There can be threat to national security as well, because there will be times that center has to take a upper hand over the state government or the regional government. Whereas there will be difficulty when there is division of powers, gets difficult to identify the issue which has been arised in which level of the government. There is difficulty to identify the issue due to distribution of powers. So, when it comes to the identifying of prospects and consequences, let us see that how well India perceives the concept of federalism. The basic structure of the Constitution of India, that is the preamble, gives space to federalism. when we talk about the Article 1 of the Constitution of India, it talks about union of states, that is alliance of states. Being geographically rich nation, it adopts federal form of government, which is one of the important features to bring in the or attract the concept of federalism. The governance of India follows disintegration form of federation, that is the holding together federation. The Constitution of India is the key to this particular federation. Whatever concept we are reading is being channeled or is being taken from the grand norm, that is our Constitution of India. There is separation of power along with the hint of rule of law attached to it, which means law is supreme and nobody is above law. It is moderately rigid by way of amending powers. Federalism and the Constitution of India can be seen again through the features which we have just discussed. When we talk about the first feature, which is the division of power, can be seen by the Schedule 7 Part 9, that is the union list, state list and the concurrent list. The written constitution, how well the Constitution of India is the part of or is attracts the federalism. Written constitution is the most important thing which we have as a country, because once the thing is written, it gets into the supreme nature. We have to understand it, we have to move by the letter of the law, whatever we have been writing it. Then it comes to the rigidity, which we discussed as the feature. Rigidity is here amalgamated with the amending powers, that is Article 368. There needs to be special majority. You cannot just amend anything and everything. There has to be reasonableness attached to it. Why do we need to amend it? What are the reasons for it? Then comes the regional level of government, which I discussed, that minimum 2 or more than 2 levels needs to be there for the federalism. So here the third tier of government was brought into existence by the 73rd and the 74th Constitutional Amendment 1992, which talks about the panchayats and municipalities. And then lastly, the most important feature is the judiciary. So here the Constitution gives the federalism or attracts the federalism, wherein the Supreme Court, High Court and other various parts of the judiciary have been specifically written and derived and decided by the makers of the Constitution of India. They are the final interpreter of the constitutional provisions, and how well the distribution of powers will be done, how well the authorities will be flowing, what sort of rigidity needs to be followed, how the division of power will be taking place, and etc. So, the most important thing, the third parameter which we need to focus is that how we are going to understand this topic, we have covered. Why we are reading this topic, we have covered. Now, how do we use this topic? How do we need to use this concept of federalism? How are we using it? We need to use the concept of federalism to critically interpret the concept in the current scenario. Like we have federalism, we have checked all the boxes for the concept of federalism, that there has to be 2 or more than 2 levels of the government, there must be rigid constitution, there must be judiciary, there must be flexibility and everything. But when it comes to the critically interpreting the federalism through the lenses of Constitution of India, we see that there are some imprints of unitary form of government as well attached to it. There are features of federal form of government as well. Now, how do we come into a conclusion that what sort of government India actually is? So, for this, the eminent professors, eminent jurists like K.C. Weare said that the Indian Union or the Union of States has subsidiary federal features. What do we understand by subsidiary federal features? That there is central government, there is state government, but when it comes to the conflict between both of them, the center will prevail. So, herein what we are doing, that we are not showing that the state is weak in any form, but we are showing that the center is strong. So, when it comes to strong center, it gives a hint of subsidiary federal nature, federal state with little bit of unitary features. When it comes to another jurist, that is Ivor Jennings, said that it is known as cooperative federalism, that the distribution of power has been done, but there is a sense of coordination between central government, state government and the regional government. If any of the lists or any of the elements of those lists gets contradicted, each of the government cooperatively comes into certain consensus, which is known as new federation for India and its peculiar needs. Now, why did Ivor Jennings say that? Because India was a developing nation and India is also a developing nation wherein peculiar needs will be arising time and again. Now, B.R. Ambedkar, who is the writer of our Constitution of India, said that federation as much as is established talks about dual polity. It avoids tight mold of federalism, that it does not restrict itself to actual federalism, but also is little liberal, and both unitary as well as federal form of government is the need of the hour for India as a country. This is what B.R. Ambedkar thought, and in order to justify the thoughts of this, we have listed a lot of things in the Constitution of India, like the powers of parliament from states to alter the boundaries, the emergency provisions being very important, wherein when emergency comes into existence, the entire power goes to the center, the powers to appoint the president, the governors, etc. There is a strong center, there is overlapping between the matters wherein predominance is given to the union, that is the center, and matters of the concurrent list or the state list will finally be decided by the center if needed. And then there is the amalgamation of federalism and unitary form of government, which is termed as quasi-federal government, wherein both the sorts of government gets into existence. So, here comes the most important thing, that is the first article, the article 1, which draws its powers from the preamble, article 1 of the Constitution of India, talking about India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. The term federation is not used here, the term union of states is used. It is not said India, that is Bharat, shall be a federation of states. It suggests that India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. So, here the federation is not the result of agreement among the countries. The state has no right to secede because it is union, that is mutually the states have decided to get into coexistence and develop the economy and growth of it. So, when we talk about this, there are major case laws which you can read throughout the Supreme Court cases, which is being uploaded daily by the Supreme Court of India. One of the prominent landmark judgment which I will suggest all my students to read is S.R. Bommai versus Union of India, year 1994. In this case, the court stated that the president should exercise his powers only after his proclamation is approved by both houses of parliament, and the power of president to dismiss a state government is not absolute. Whereas, in the state of Rajasthan versus Union of India 1977, in the former Chief Justice, Justice Beg, called the Constitution of India as an amphibian. What do you understand by the term amphibian? Amphibian is something which can stay within the water and also outside the water in normal nature, in atmosphere. So, amphibian is also that term which we can use for India when it comes to formation of governments or good governance. That is, it follows the nature, a little nature of federalism, a little nature of unitariness, and it becomes amphibian in nature, that as and when the need requires, the federation or the unitariness can be used simultaneously. So, the end motive or the goal must be to adopt the form of government in such a way that there is social, economic and political growth of that particular nation as a whole, and not just to stick with certain concept in order that we have to attract that particular concept only. So, there must be flexibility in that manner, and also we need to see that what suits our governance the best. Now, whatever we have read in the first segment, I discussed that we need to understand each concept by sieving it through the three important parameters, that is how, what and why. So, summarizing it all together, we can see that how did this concept of federalism came into existence. It started with the term feudus, which is a Latin word, and came through federation, which is known as provinces, states or union of states. And when these two concepts of feudus and federation came together, it became the concept of federalism, giving and defining the distribution of powers in certain way. When we understood how does this term or the concept came into existence, we need to understand what are we reading, what are we reading this concept for. We are reading this concept to identify which form of government suits us best, that is the federal form of government or the unitary form of government. When we have decided it through the features of it, we discussed 5 important features, that is how does the judiciary help into the formation of the nature of this concept, that is federal or unitary, the rigidity, the division of powers, the citizenship, etc. And then when we got to identify which form of government India as a country follows, that is the federal form of government initially, it suggests because there is horizontal flow of federation and there is vertical flow of federation, which is integration and disintegration, which we discussed in the lecture. So, here the flow of government decides and keeps a checks and balance in both the division of power and separation of powers and authorities attached to it, so that there is no sorts of arbitrariness involved in it and there is no discrimination or no political involvement happening over the decisions which has been made for country as a whole. Then coming to the Constitution of India, we have discussed the imprints of unitary form of government as well and federal form of government as well. There are multiple mentions in the Constitution of India, wherein to summarize we discussed Article 1 of the Constitution of India, which clears the air that it is the amalgamation of both the federal form of government and the unitary form of government, that is India, the Bharat is union of states and not federation of states, and it is being decided upon the needs of the society, needs of the hour, as it is a developing nation and it will always depend on the peculiar needs of India as a country, which was given a second by eminent jurists like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Sir Ivor Jennings and etc. So, here I hope we have understood the concept of federalism through the lenses of the Constitution of India, and we can critically analyze that what sort of government do we have. Is it federal, is it unitary or is it quasi-federal? Thank you.